What's up, everybody? Welcome. Guy here. We are live on YouTube and I think on X. If you're watching, hit that like, subscribe, podcast. Very excited about the show today. We are counting down to the draft, which means we're also counting down to Brandon Ayuk. Will he be traded? Won't he be traded? I want to talk today about tight ends because Ethan Strauss said something to me, which I'll play a few weeks ago, and it got me thinking about the 49ers and tight end. So that's what a lot of this show is about today. 5 weeks removed from vocal surgery, doing better every day. Thanks in advance for your concerns and criticisms. So here's where we're going to start. George Kittle's been such a massive part of the Niners' success, a two-time All-Pro. The contract that he signed 4 years ago is still the second highest total guaranteed for tight ends and the third highest fully guaranteed contract for a tight end. Given how valuable he is to the Niners as a blocker and a receiver chess piece, you'd think they try to find another Kittle. But their backup tight ends have combined for a total of 20 catches in the last 3 years. Why is this so hard? A guy that's going to come on today and try and answer this question, I consider him a football expert. He's an excellent football expert. He's a friend of mine. His name's Evan Moore. He played 5 years in the NFL as a tight end, mostly with the Browns, the Seahawks, the Eagles, the Packers. Before that, he played his college football at Stanford. He was part of Jim Harbaugh's big first signature win, that 41-point underdog upset win over USC in 2007. He also played hoops, was on a team that was the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament for Mike Montgomery on the Stanford basketball team. But Evan and I worked together for a long time with the Pac-12 Network and at SiriusXM. And it was clear to me that he's one of the best football analysts in America. And I mean that, one of the best football analysts in America. So I'm putting pressure on him now. He's mostly stopped doing his media work. He does some tight end coaching down in Orange County where he lives. But I'm happy that after much convincing, he finally agreed to come on the show today. He's one of my favorite people in the world. And he knows football really well. And he's Evan Moore. Evie, what's up, man?
Guys, it is fantastic to be here. And you said I kind of stopped with a lot of media responsibilities, and that is because on Saturdays, spring and fall, I spent a lot of my time coaching AYSO soccer with my 3 daughters, and that has trumped my media responsibilities and the travel that's involved with that. So
also because
you
the Pac-12 collapsed. That was the other thing.
The Pac-12 collapsing was not helpful. You sound fantastic for being 5 weeks removed from vocal cord surgery. That's for a guy that makes a living talking. Mm-hmm. Having someone touch your vocal cords is probably a pretty scary thing. So yeah, I'm glad to hear you're doing well, man.
Thank you. Thank you. I refused to do LASIK, but I did vocal cords. And, well, hopefully in the end it's
you just got to trust the experts, right?
You got to trust the experts. That's right. Yeah. You've been under the knife many times in your football life. Too many times. I know that, that definitely affected your career. But, I mean, you had a year where it was you'd signed a 3-year contract with the Browns. You caught a bunch of balls. Mm-hmm. This is what, like, probably over a decade now away. The tight end position has changed since then. But I just want to know from your perspective, you've looked at some of the tight ends in this draft. You heard what I just said about George Kittle. Yeah. So the reason I asked Evan to come on, the first thing I texted you is I just want to know why it's so hard to find these guys. Mm-hmm. And this comes from a friend, Ethan Strauss. I have the 1.5-minute comment. I may play it for you later. But he said to me when I was on his podcast like a month ago, he's like, what? These guys are so important. Championship teams all seem to have them, yet nobody emphasizes them. They don't try to draft them in the first round, really. They don't pay them. What's the deal? So let's start kind of 50,000 feet. What's the deal with these tight ends?
The easy answer, that I think the most obvious answer, is that 6'5" athletes that run really well and catch the ball well and play low and play with good pad level and do all the things that's required of a good football player, those guys aren't easy to find, right? I know it seems like it because you watch the NCAA tournament and they reference certain guys. Oh, this guy might try out for football and make an NFL roster next year. Like, all you've got to do is be big and be able to move well. There's obviously so much more to playing the tight end position. So those guys aren't growing on trees, contrary to what it may seem like when you watch college football. A lot of big guys out there running around, right? That's the easy answer. The more detailed answer is that there has not been a position that's evolved more than the tight end position in the last 20 years. And if I could simplify the spectrum of tight ends, you start on one side, kind of the old school tight end, of the inline tight end that's mainly a blocker. And then as a function of his ability to block and defenses not knowing what he's doing, he can get open in the passing game from time to time and be a friendly target for a tight end. He's probably got average speed and reliable hands, right? That's one. This is very general on purpose because we don't have 2 hours to do this. In the middle, you've got what I think is becoming kind of a unicorn amongst tight ends, and that is the George Kittle type, the Rob Gronkowski type. This is what, when you hear analysts during the draft coming up, when they talk about a true wide tight end, what they mean by that is, every tight end is labeled as a Y or a U or an F in an offense. That's the position, right? A true Y is the guy that really is a 3-down tight end, can put his hand on the ground at the end of the line of scrimmage or even split out, and really can handle all the responsibilities of a tight end. He's a more than adequate blocker. He's more than adequate in the pass game. He can get down the field and make plays down the field. He pretty much checks every box, right? The Tony Gonzalez, the Rob Gronkowski, the George Kittle types, those guys have become almost unicorns in the game because so many tight ends have now specialized, right? And said, okay, this is the role I'm going to take, and I'm going to do it really, really well. And I'm not concerned about the other things I can't do well. I'm going to get drafted based off what I do well. So I'm going to focus on that. The last one is the other end of the spectrum from the first one I mentioned, and that is more the receiving specialist, right? Now, let me go back. The H-back / fullback looking tight end, I'd still put in the first one, right? Catch the ball out of the backfield, but primarily a blocker. I'd put in that first category that I mentioned. This last one is this receiving specialist, right? And I'm going to throw out some names. Other people would probably come up with plenty of names as well. But the Zach Ertz type, right? And even to some extent, what we're going to see from Brock Bowers, because Brock Bowers is undersized at the end of the day. He's not a fantastic blocker, but he's a game changer, right? Zach Ertz is a fantastic example of that. The hard part with these guys in this last category is they require NFL coaches. This isn't as difficult for new school coaches, but they require more old school NFL coaches. This is why Andy Reid's so great, because Travis Kelce's in this box, I think. Travis Kelce and George Kittle are completely different players. And I put Travis in this box, even though he's an adequate blocker, I still put him in this last category. These guys require coaches to think outside the box. And this is why it took so long for this position to evolve, is because coaches struggle. You got to remember, there's competing interest in a building, right? When offensive coordinators, let's just say it's an offensive coordinator that's not a run game coordinator. Okay, so you've got your offensive line coach who's more your run game coordinator, and your offensive coordinator is your pass game coordinator. There's competing interests there, because your run game coordinator, who's your offensive line coach, I dealt with this a lot in my career. It drives them nuts when those receiving guys, tight ends, are on the field and we're in a run formation. We're trying to run the football. Drives them nuts. They're like, get this guy off the field. He can't effectively block in my run scheme. And then the pass game coordinator is like, well, hold on. If he can just be adequate, we could really, really develop a potent passing game off of this run game if we can get him to just be adequate. But the run game coordinator is like, no. I don't want adequate. I want good. I want more. I want fantastic, right, in the run game, because I want to be able to run the football. So that's what's interesting about what the Niners do, because you brought this up in the context of the Niners. George Kittle is that unicorn now, a true wide tight end that does it all. Now, the Niners are a run-first offense. We know that, right? Kyle Shanahan, everybody I know that's played for Kyle, I have not played for him, says nobody teaches the run game to all the positions, receivers, offensive line, fullback, tight end. Nobody teaches the run game to all the positions like Kyle Shanahan and his staff do, right? It's almost, they do it so well that it's like, hey, insert any running back there that's willing to like make one cut and go, and it'll work because everybody else does their job so well. So the prospect of inserting a tight end that is more geared towards the pass game and a less than adequate blocker, I think would be a challenge. And what it would force them to do, they'd really look like a slot receiver. Because I think Kyle would say, let's not try to put a round peg in a square hole. Let's keep, George at the wide position, and let's let this guy split out and do his thing. That's thinking outside the box, though. And a lot of coaches see that as a risk. Kyle's in a different position. He can take that risk. A lot of young coaches aren't willing to do that. So as you can see, because it's evolved, there are some incompatibilities between these age-old schemes in football and this new position that keeps evolving that make it hard for coaches to come to grips with the fact that I just got to find a way to get this guy on the field. So Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, or I'll go back to when Zach Ertz was drafted. And I say Zach because right now he's got the record for the most catches in a single season by a tight end. And it started with Chip Kelly, who we all know is a little bit different, the way he thinks about things. So the other side of this is to get a team to commit and say, you know what, I don't care that Zach isn't a great blocker. We're going to feed him 12 times a game. you have to have made a financial or a draft commitment to a guy like that. You're not going to do that to some undrafted free agent, right? If you've committed a second round pick to a guy or you've signed him in free agency, you're going to say, hey, we're going to find a way to do it, right? So all I'm getting at here is this: it's a complex thing, and there's competing interest inside a building. But at the end of the day, these guys are playmakers. And one big step in the evolution of the position goes back to, I want to say 2012 or 13, when Jimmy Graham was in that battle with the NFL Labor Department and the New Orleans Saints about how he would be franchise tagged. Right? The Saints were trying to say, nah, he's a tight end. And Jimmy's like, no, I'm not. I'm basically a receiver. I'm a playmaker. And I want to be classified as whatever's the more money because that's how you're using me. Right? So that was a big step in the direction of how the league looks at those guys, because it almost was seen as, okay, now it's okay to split these guys out and do more things, because Jimmy was, and there's other guys that did it along with Jimmy. He wasn't the only one. But there's all these steps along the way. And now I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this is the position that he's evolved the most in the league over the last 20 years. And it's continuing to happen. And this class this year is no different. It presents challenges for coaches that are interested in drafting these guys, but they're also game-changing players, and you have to try to find a way to kind of build your offense around them.
So like in the case of Kittle, there's so few guys like him.
Right.
He's categorized with all the guys that are blockers from a contract standpoint, and it
correct
artificially suppresses his value, right? Like I think
we're getting away from that. Over in the past it has, but I think we're kind of starting to migrate or evolve away from that, from that limiting factor for these guys.
The fastest way for a tight end to get paid is to be drafted 8th, like Kyle Pitts, right? You get drafted 8th and you become one of the highest paid tight ends in the NFL immediately.
Right.
You know, I mean, like I look at George, who had the second most targets on the 49ers last year. He was in the league 53rd in overall targets in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. This is Kittle.
Kittle.
Yeah.
Like, well, TJ Hawkinson, that guy's sweet. Agreed. He was 22nd in the league in targets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Evan Ingram was 12th, only 2 guys in the top 25. So like here you're talking about unicorns. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I go, well, there's going to be 5 or 6 wide receivers drafted in the first round this year. Mm-hmm. There's one tight end that everybody likes, Brock Bowers. So why wouldn't I take, if I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here, why wouldn't I take Brock Bowers over Rome Odunze? Right? Like,
well, it's a fair, yeah. Well, okay. So here's when you talk about that comparison. So Rome Odunze is special. We've talked about him a ton on our Pac-12 stuff, obviously. That just comes down to, let's remove the label of the position and let's say which one is going to impact the game more. And you can make a pretty strong argument that it's going to be Brock Bowers. Now, the question about Brock Bowers is, there has been some injury issues while he's at Georgia. He's been insanely, historically productive still. So the question becomes, because he's a bit undersized and he wasn't asked to do a whole lot in the run game, do you trust, when you're taking Brock Bowers in the top 10, do you think you're going to get the kind of production from him that you'll get from a high-level receiver? And that answer could be yes. That's totally fair, because look at what Kansas City does. Look what the Chiefs do. Now, this is an exception. I'm not saying there's a lot of Travis Kelce's out there, but Travis was a 3rd-round pick out of Cincinnati. And some of that was because of, we saw in the Kelce documentary, some of the character concerns, right? People wondered, is he going to get himself in trouble when he gets here? It was kind of silly at the time.
He got kicked out of school.
Yeah, it held him back, right? Well, then he got brought back on the team.
Then he got brought back.
And he showed that he was just fine. And Andy Reid proved that it was probably overdone. That being said, though, Travis Kelce, I still give Andy Reid a lot of credit for that, right? Because that took a lot. Like what Travis does, it's not always pretty, right? The guy rarely even runs full speed. But he is just a phenomenal football player with a great feel for how coverage works, right? And the challenge with Travis is, and this is why this position evolving has been so important. It's not only about what I'm doing offensively as a play caller. It's, well, how is the defense going to react to me? So these are the things I think that a lot of analysts on TV do a good job of talking about, is that when let's just call it a second tight end. When a second tight end comes out on the field, does the defense stay in their base defense, or do they add another DB on the field and treat that guy as a receiver? Right? This is like the crux of why second tight ends are so valuable in an offense. Because if that second tight end can also be an adequate blocker, and they add another DB on the field, well, now you've got numbers to run the football. Right? You may not like the matchup as much with the second tight end against like a fast safety as you do against a slower linebacker. So when they pull a guy out of the game and bring another DB in because that second tight end is a receiver, well, can we run the ball now? Right? Is he good enough to do that? That's the chess match between these guys, right? To be able to pull that off is how does the defense respond when those guys come on the field? And that's another critical element as to why the position has continued to evolve, is because defenses don't know how to treat them. And defenses are all about matching personnel. Like, I mean, it's simple, but like you got you got 4 receivers on the field, you're going to see nickel, dime personnel, right? More DBs are on the field, less linebackers. You maybe even take out a defensive lineman at some point. And that tight end is just such a wild card, a joker position that throws off defensive coordinators so much that they don't know how to react when these certain guys come on the field. And it just ends up in mismatches, right? Receivers don't do that. Like you might have a great receiver that's just better than who's guarding him, but that's different than a defensive coordinator saying, I don't know who to put out there when this guy's on the field. Because he runs by our linebackers, but he also blocks our DBs. I don't know what to do, right? That's incredibly frustrating. And the good offensive coordinators find a way to do it. Kyle's one of them. And that's why I think it's intriguing to think of a run-first offense taking a guy that really is a little more of a receiving weapon that is treated more like a receiver.
He did it. There was like a 2-month stretch when Jordan Reed was on the Niners and healthy.
I mean, Jordan Reed's a fantastic player, but very rarely healthy, right? So it probably wasn't long enough.
It wasn't, but it was long enough to see what it could look like if he had a receiving tight end as tight end 2 with Kittle.
Yes. You think
he got hurt? It was over. Well, I mean, it was.
So when did he join the team?
Oh, I don't know. This is a few years ago.
But what time of year was it when he joined the team?
I don't remember if he was with the team in camp. My point is just if he
joined the team like in September.
Yeah,
this is a wrinkle. This is a wrinkle. This has to happen it has to happen in February. You have to get OTAs. It doesn't, like, for example, towards the end of my career, I joined the Seahawks. Kellen Winslow was released. I was released from the Browns. This was in 2012. And Pete Carroll and I had a great relationship. He recruited me out of high school. I'm from Southern California. We always kept in touch. And I get a chance at the end of my career to go play for Pete in Seattle. And like he goes, hey, if you're willing to come here, Kellen's making too much money. We're gonna let him go, and we'll bring you in. I said, that sounds great. And I joined in like literally Labor Day weekend, September 1 after cut day. And I think I grasp playbooks pretty quickly for the most part. I take pride in that. Like, you throw a playbook. I didn't learn our playbook until I didn't really have because so many things change over the course of an offseason, little nuances that I just am supposed to know. And I have to remind Darrell Bevel, our OC, Darrell, I wasn't here in March. I wasn't here in April when you guys did that. And no one's told me that. Right. So it wasn't until week 10 that I felt like I know whatever you call.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is the Jordan Reed thing went well. And he'd been with Kyle in Washington. So I think I'm looking here. He was with him week 1. But it looked, that's the only time really the Niners have had a number 2 tight end that could catch. And it was good. Right. Like, it worked. It was like, oh, it felt different. And, they haven't gone back to it. Now, they have Kittle, they have Juszczyk, they have a running back that gets 83 targets. So they do it a different way. But, to me, there's 2 parts of it from a Niners perspective, which is the big picture of how do you, George is so important. How do you replace him? Yeah. But that's another day's problem. It'd be nice to bring a tight end 2 in that could evolve with him. Last year, they drafted an athletic guy in the 3rd round named Cameron Latu, and it looked awful in camp. It was like,
what percentage of the Niners, and I'm not asking you to give me an estimate maybe. Yeah. What percentage of the Niners snaps would you say are in 12 personnel, which is 1 back, 2 tight ends, and 2 receivers?
Well, I can tell you on first downs last year.
Well, forget 12. Just to say 2 tight end personnels. How often do you see it with the Niners the last 2 or 3 years?
I mean, in run situations, first down, they're in 12 personnel.
But Juszczyk is not a tight end, obviously. That's 21 usually, right?
Right.
So are you counting? Are you saying Juszczyk was 12?
No. I'm not counting Juice.
So
but I'm just telling you, like, I have their first down 12 personnel breakdowns. They're 27th in the NFL in 12 personnel on first down.
Okay. Well, it's fair to ask.
I'll tell you this, though. They are second. The Dolphins and the Niners are the only 2 teams that are in 21, 2 back, which includes Juice.
Right.
Over 40% of the time on first down.
That's 2 backs, 1 tight end, and 2 receivers. That's kind of a lot of people's old school base personnel for the most part.
Dolphins and Niners. Those are the only 2 that are in 21 on first down over 40%.
That's because fullback is, tough to find. Right. So it's also fair to ask. I know in theory it makes a lot of sense to love
Yes.
love the idea of a second tight end, but I don't know if you've asked Kyle this, but it's also fair to ask, like, hey, is this something that kind of, I mean, look, there aren't that many coaches in the league where I just know what their identity is offensively, and I could tell you could show me, you could take the numbers and the colors off the jerseys and make them like silhouettes and show me a whole game of play calling. I could probably tell you it's Kyle Shanahan, right? Mm-hmm. So that being said, a guy that has his identity offensively, and I'm not saying he's predictable. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, he does the same thing all the time. I just know where the identity lies for the Niners and a lot of Kyle's offenses that he orchestrates, right? That being said, I think it's also fair to ask, is a second tight end something he values, especially when you got Juszczyk in the mix, right? He might say, when we're in obvious running situations, I've got an all pro at fullback. I don't really need a second tight end on the hip of Kittle that may not do nearly as well as Kyle does coming out of the backfield. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the evidence tells us he doesn't. He's got 20 catches in the last 3 years to his second tight end, right? The question is, would he adjust if he had? And I think the answer is yes. And maybe it's not so much about a Kittle replacement. It's about one day, Juszczyk, what are you doing with that spot, right? How do you find his replacement?
That's where it might become necessary. But again, I want to emphasize that when we're talking about a second tight end that maybe isn't a dominant block, because so often, and this might not even be fair to always position it this way, but so often we think of a second tight end as kind of, especially when you've got a Y like George Kittle, we think of the second tight end as that sort of move tight end, like receiving option that can split out a little bit more, even though George can do plenty of that. But that's how we kind of generally think about it, right? A successful second tight end. And I mean, that takes a commitment from a play caller to work that guy into your offense, because you're going to sacrifice. If you're a run first team, you're going to sacrifice a little bit about what is your core identity to accomplish that. So it's a risk, right? Every time, like, especially with your offensive line coach, every time you go into that formation where that guy's on the field, and if you feel like you give just a little bit in the run game, because what do you have to do to put him on the field? You got to take Juice off the field, right? Usually, like, there's really not going to be many formations. It'd be 22 if Juice is on the field, but that's probably not going to happen all that often. So you're like, we're going to run the ball, and we're going to take Juice off the field, and then have our second tight end in, who we hope is more than adequate in the run game, but is proficient in the pass game. It takes a big commitment. A lot of times, a identity shifting commitment that a lot of guys aren't ready to take on, especially if what you're doing has been working. You know what I mean?
All right. Now let me ask you about it.
And let me say one more thing. When I was in Cleveland, our offensive coordinator was Brian Daboll, and this was under Eric Mangini. This was like my second to last year in Cleveland before Pat Shurmur got there. And Brian Daboll really believed in being multiple. And hey, we're going to build this around, and this goes to another philosophical discussion about, we're going to build our offense around our personnel, right? And that was his thing. Each week it was like a Bill Belichick thing, right? Each week our game plan would look quite a bit different each week offensively based off our opponent, right? Like our, blitz pickups, our reactions, our hot routes, all these things would look a little bit different. And Brian, I give him a lot of credit. He was willing, no matter what, he didn't care what looked right. He was willing to make adjustments week to week based on what worked. Now, this isn't an insult, but our offensive line coach, who was also our run game coordinator, because Brian, when he wanted to run the ball, he'd just be like, hey, George, what do you want to do? George Warhaw's been in the league for a long time. George hated when I was on the field, because he'd be like, we've got Ben Watson out there. Like, let's run the ball. Like, what are we doing, right? I'd rather have Lawrence Vickers, our fullback, who was really good. Yeah, I'd rather have Lawrence Vickers back there. So there was this battle all the time. And sometimes before you knew it, the second tight end position, which was either me or Jordan Cameron, who ended up being a Pro Bowler. This is a really important point here. Which was either me or Jordan Cameron. George would be like, I don't want these guys. We could just feel it. And he usually won out because Peyton Hillis had a great year that year. He ran for a bunch of yards, ends up on the cover of Madden. And these second tight ends that were like leaner, faster guys, that's not what we were offensively. Okay, then what happens? A couple years later, Jordan Cameron, some of you might forget, was at SC. In comes Norv Turner. And Norv goes, no. Like, we're gonna ask everyone to do what they're good at, right? And we're gonna get I wasn't there anymore, but we're gonna get Jordan Cameron on the field. And we're not gonna ask him to run routes. He's not gonna. Guy was a Pro Bowler, 80 catches and over 10 touchdowns, right? There are guys out there that are capable of this. but they just don't fit in the framework of what coaches want to do. And it's quite possible that Jordan Cameron, for example, and I don't say this as an insult because Jordan Cameron is a buddy of mine and an unbelievable athlete, but he's not a physical run blocker. It's possible that Jordan Cameron could have been taken in the 4th round by a Kyle Shanahan team instead of the Browns, which is where he was drafted after very little production in college. It was all based off athleticism. It's possible Jordan could have been taken by a Kyle team and really never showed up because he was asked to do things that he's just not good enough in the run game. I'm not sure what to do with him. Are we really going to play him 60 snaps a game? And how do we do it? And before you know it, he's not productive and he's going somewhere else. He's been cut. Those things happen all the time, right? And then, he was fortunate to get Norv and blossom in that system and have 80 catches and a Pro Bowl.
Well, you make me think about like everything is so situational. We talk about it all the time with quarterback. You and I have talked about this a lot with quarterbacks.
Right.
You tend to think incorrectly that other positions like these guys, quarterbacks don't change teams, but tight ends change teams all the time. If Jordan Cameron had been drafted by the Niners, somebody else would have seen him and liked him, and they would have drafted him, and it would have been fine. But, anyone who watches Hard Knocks knows getting 3 snaps in the preseason is really hard.
Yeah.
If you're an undrafted player, if you're a 5th-round pick, the idea of finding
really
your correct situation is there's like anything in life, I guess there's a lot of luck involved.
Your listeners may ask, like, what is the difference between this and any other position, right? You're fighting to get on the field. You're fighting to get coaches to believe in you enough to throw you the football, or depending on what position you're in, or just believe in you to back you. What's the difference? Well, again, everything we've talked about in this segment kind of reveals a trend of the evolution of the tight end position has certainly taken place, but there are still sort of old school parameters in place that stop some of these guys from being successful because they're not receivers, even though you try to label them that way. They're not receivers. They can't necessarily run. Now, remember, the tight end break point, and defenses know this. For most routes, the tight end break point is between 8 and 12 yards. So safeties and linebackers are taught that if a tight end is not broken down by about 10 yards to cut, he's running a vertical route, right? Turn and run, right? Because these guys generally aren't fast enough. They're not as fast as receivers to run a 15-yard comeback route, right? Or 18-yard comeback route. It's just, it doesn't time up because they're not quick enough on a 5-step drop, right? Even the fast ones, 4.6, 4.5, they're still, it's hard for them to run those routes and have the timing all make sense. So all that being said, like the route tree ends up becoming a little more limited. They're not going to run most of the routes that receivers run. And so it becomes a challenge, right? Over the course of this evolution for coaches to grasp the fact that we've got to adjust a little bit to get these on the field. And by the way, if we're right, look at Zach Ertz, for example. Zach is not fast in a football sense. He's at best a 4.6. Most of his career, I was probably running even slower than that. He's quick in and out of his breaks. He's got great hands. And then the last thing I'll say about tight ends. Don't underestimate how rare it is for a tight end, and even a receiver for that matter, but we're focusing on tight ends, to really want the ball every play. Okay? Tight ends take more hits than receivers because of the way they catch the ball. They're more compromised usually. There are a lot of tight ends out there that once they snag 4 balls, they're like, I don't care. I'm good. There are a select few that go, I don't care if you throw it to me 15, 20 times, I'm going to make a play. That was what I admired about Zach Ertz. He was one of those guys. Every time he ran a route, now some people might say he'd cut it short and try to get open and blow up the whole route tree, right? But Zach wanted the ball every play. And that is not that common for guys to because, those guys take hits, right? They're not catching it by the sideline and getting out of bounds.
And you catch 4, you're one of the best in the league. You catch 4.
Right. And sometimes that's enough for guys. They're tired of taking those hits, right? And they've been blocking all game. They're like, oh my God. But for a guy to really want to see the ball, that's why what Travis Kelce does is incredible too. You want to throw it to him 18 times a game. He's like, perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's more, I know it sounds silly. You're like, what are you talking about? These guys all want the ball. 8+ times a game. I'm not sure every tight end in the league really wants that kind of action coming at him 8+ times a game. It's a big load to shoulder. And a lot of that goes into run after the catch as well and how good these guys are at avoiding injury. You know what I mean?
But well, it's also like, think about George Kittle. It's hard to bring him down which means it takes 3 people to bring him down. And that is more pain, right? That is more contact. It's funny, by the way, just listen to you talk. You're talking about unicorns and people love Brock Bowers. You called him undersized. He's 6'4", 240.
He's undersized. 240 is undersized. I mean, look, I was a receiver in college. I moved to the tight end position in the NFL, and I immediately went from like 235 to like 248. And I was that almost my entire career, like right on the dot. And I wasn't a blocking tight end. Now, Brock's a little more compact than I was, and he bends really well, which is a huge advantage, right? Like the low man.
Ankle flexion, man. Even if he's 20 pounds lighter, he can win if he's lower, right? And he's strong. Look at those legs. But he's still undersized. And we didn't see him at Georgia mauling people on the end of the line of scrimmage. That wasn't his role. I mean, he comes out of the backfield. He's incredible with the ball in his hands, and he catches the ball really well, and he runs great routes. But he's undersized, right? And that's the thing in the NFL that starts to get exposed more is these guys play with great leverage and great technique. And if you are undersized, you can struggle in the run game. So they might get him active in the run game, just on the move a little bit more, might be cutting more people, doing all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Okay. One other question. We got a bunch of stuff but one thing I want to ask you, quarterbacks draft inflation, running backs draft deflation. You're talking about evolution of tight ends, but also it seems like there's a finite number of bodies, even as the game evolves. So I looked at the last 11 drafts. We had more first rounds with no tight ends taken than first rounds with multiple tight ends taken. Okay. So you're more likely to have 0 first round tight ends than 2.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Will that change? Are we going to 10 years? Are we going to be talking about this? And there's every draft, there's 3 tight ends going in the first round, my feeling listening to you is that what we've got here, 1 tight end, no tight ends, 3 tight ends, 1 tight end, 2, 0, 1, 0, 1 first round tight ends is not going to change. Like that's my feeling listening to you.
I don't think it will. And the reason is because I think a lot of NFL coaches look at the college game and think I can find value at the tight end position in light of all we just discussed. I can find value in the tight end position because a lot of college offenses just haven't reached a point where they can effectively use that position really well. Does that make sense? Like there are some talented pass catching tight ends in college football. I mean, I was calling games in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the Big 12 for like a 5-year span from 15 to like 21, like a 6-year span, 2015 to 2021. And oftentimes I'd look at our board and I'd say, okay, even talking to the coaches, like let's talk about your tight end position. And a lot of them love their top guy. Oh, he's good. And then the game starts and you watch what they do. They don't feed him. They don't spread him out and ask him to run all these different kind of routes, even though they claim that he has that ability. I don't think a lot of college offenses use the tight end very well, quite frankly. And it's not because they're not talented. There's plenty of guys, as we're seeing each year, there's guys in the draft, right? Now, this one's a little bit weaker as far as complete tight ends go. But by and large, and some of this might be exacerbated by the fact that we're watching college football just evolve quickly, coaches coming and going, players coming and going. And I mentioned earlier that being a tight end like that, that is used effectively in an offense like that, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Like the Mahomes-Kelsey thing, and that's an extreme example, did not happen overnight, right? They have an unspoken deal going on that's pretty incredible. But time and time again, watching college offenses, I see tight ends that are used either incorrectly or underused altogether. And what I think that does is create value, because a lot of NFL coaches that are doing their homework and watching it closely and saying, whoa, like this dude has made some flash plays, right? This guy can play type thing, but they just don't use him all that well, right? Or he's been hurt. That happens as well. Like think about last year, like Oregon State had a kid named Luke Musgrave. Yeah. And if you watch Luke play throughout his career, when he was on the field, he just got better and better. And you're like, this kid could be pretty special. He went to the Packers, right? Yes. And he made some plays this year. I mean, he was a big part of what they were doing, right? So I think that's, to answer your question, I think it stays roughly the same, that trend, but I think that's the reason why, is because I just don't think a lot of college offenses get to the point where they can figure out schematically how to effectively use these guys.
It is so true. Just like I've been in those meetings too, where like you go to practice, you're like, oh, you guys got to see our tight end. You're like, oh yeah, shit, man.
And then he gets like 2 balls a game.
He'll catch like the first ball of the game.
Yeah.
Like,
here's the other thing that
except
really
Stanford. Stanford used to feed David Shaw's Stanford used to feed those guys, right?
Oh, 100%. Now, when I was there, like,
But
yeah, after me was Kobe Fleener, Zach Ertz, and all these guys, Levine Toilolo. I mean, these guys, they became like tight end U
Caden
for, yeah, Caden,
Smith.
it was, Caden, yeah, Caden Smith. The other thing that really pisses me off, and we talk about how to use these guys, and we see this in the NFL sometimes too, but especially in college. You get down the red zone, they call it goal line fade. You split the tight end out, and it's obvious what you're doing, and they just chuck it up to the corner of the end zone and ask them to go make a play.
Can't jump.
It's the laziest call in football by a coordinator. I despise it because tight ends, if you give them a two-way go over the middle of the field in the red zone, what I'd rather see is like, hey, run to the middle of the field in the end zone. Let's say you're on like the 8-yard line. Run to the middle of the field in the end zone, and we're going to throw it up to you there. Two-way go, right? Now there's more defenders in the mix. I understand that. But I hate the goal line fade for tight ends. I think it's limiting for them. I'd rather see them run a slant and get their body between the ball and the defender as they come inside, right? It's more catchable ball. There's a lot of things going on like that in college sometimes where I watch, and like before the play, I'm like, here they go. Here comes the goal line fade. And they throw it, and it's incomplete because the guy gets jammed at the line of scrimmage because he can't get off press against a really good DB. And it's incomplete. You're like, that was a stupid play. That was a waste, right?
The 5'9" corner can jump. Right?
He can jump, and he's quicker than the tight end is off the line. All he wants to do is get his hands on him, you know?
Okay. I don't know. I know you're not doing like a draft breakdown, full film study of every guy, but I know you have watched some of them.
Pay me to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. Well, maybe we will pay you to do that. But what stands out to you in this? Anybody you like? Anybody you don't? I sent you some video. I don't know if you watched Ben Sinnott, because someone said to me like, "Oh, I like this guy at Kansas State," and I sent him to you, and I'm like, I think he's more fullback, more like. I don't know if he's
classic Kansas State, right? I mean, I know Bill Snyder's not there anymore, but they've always got a type of tight end, if you will. But go scroll up a little bit. You see the top two guys. Jatavian Sanders, I think, was a pretty highly recruited guy out of college. He made plays. He was productive at Texas. What's odd though is
somebody told me, Evan. I'll just interject on Sanders. Somebody told me all his big plays come on busted plays. That was the analysis I got on him.
Well, I mean, that might not be his fault, right? That could be a quarterback problem too. I mean, there's some people that complain that, why am I blanking on his name? Quinn Ewers. There's some people that complain that Quinn Ewers hasn't really developed at the rate they thought he would develop at. So if your tight end, who's got a lot of ability, is only making plays, again, this goes back to the comment I made earlier. I don't know how well Steve Sarkisian is using him. I haven't done a deep study on Texas's offense, but that could be a quarterback problem too, not only a tight end problem. It might be accurate. Hey, all his big plays come on busted plays. Fair, but it might not be his fault. We talked about Brock Bowers plenty, but Jatavian Sanders is still an intriguing prospect, right? Big athletic guy that could get down the field. But again, as we go through here, and I know we've had some in the last like 5 years, but it's just not that common these days to see a guy who is a true Y, hand on the ground, that is proficient, not just adequate, proficient in the run game, like point of attack, can take on not only like an outside linebacker at the line of scrimmage, but also a 5 technique, which is like a true defensive tackle on the end of the line of scrimmage. Can take him on and also get down the seam and run like a seam ball and be moving at a legit 4.6 and catch the ball effectively. That used to be, I mean, I feel like it used to be more common. It probably is not quite as common as I remember, but that to me is the tougher one to find than the receiving tight end that we can split out and do some cool things with. I still think the gold at the position, the gold standard at the position, as much as I love Travis Kelce, is not even Travis Kelce. The gold standard is Gronkowski. It's George Kittle. It's the guys that as I line up defensively, I really have no idea what's coming at me because this guy is just as good in the run game as he is in the pass game. Those are the guys that you really got to be wary of. And I know it sounds funny saying that because Travis Kelce's now won 2 Super Bowls in a row and he's been the biggest piece of what they have offensively. Well, I shouldn't say that. We all know that's Mahomes, but he's been the second biggest piece of what they have offensively. He's an incredible receiver. But when you've got an all-world talent at quarterback, you can pull that stuff off. If I'm building a team, I'm taking the guys that I have no idea what they're going to do because they're so good at both.
Should we just take a guy at Iowa then? Should that just default Iowa? Take the Iowa guy? Take Eric All?
Well, who do we so right now in the league, but besides George Kittle, who's the kid for Detroit?
Laporta.
So Laporta's been fantastic, and there's one more.
Hawkinson?
Yeah, I mean, Hawkinson's overall been pretty good. I mean, the tight end, I mean, between the last maybe 15 years between Iowa and Stanford, there's been some pretty good ones that have come out. Iowa probably takes the cake as far as complete tight ends go. But yeah, I mean, usually you can lean that because these guys emphasize that in their offense. Okay, but why though? When you watch Iowa play, they're in 12 personnel the majority of the time, right? There's 2 tight ends on the field. They're emphasizing running the football, and these guys can also run and catch.
Well, anybody you like? Was there anybody you liked outside of somebody else? Is there anybody? Charles asked, "Is there anybody you like besides Bowers?" Understanding again, I did not pay you to do a tight end deep dive on this draft, but
yeah, easy guys. He said my media responsibility is over. Go scroll down a little bit because it ain't always the top 10 guys. I'll tell you that. Dallin is it Holker, right? That's how you pronounce his last name. I remember watching the Colorado State-Colorado game this year. And what was his production level this year? You have his stats for this season. 64 catches, 766 yards, 6 touchdowns. So if you look at the progression of his production from his first year to his third year, that obviously trends in the right direction. And that is obviously very intriguing for guys that are making decisions on this stuff for NFL teams. They look at it and they say, whoa, he stepped into a bigger role. He accepted it and did a really nice job. Who was the kid from Colorado State a couple years ago?
Trey McBride.
Yeah. Is he still in Arizona?
Yeah. He's their best player on offense.
Yeah. I did a Colorado State game his last year. And that's why it's a bummer not to still be calling these college games, because when I watched Trey McBride, I don't remember who else was in that tight end class, but I looked at it and I thought, this guy's the best tight end I've seen in this class. With everything he does, watching him in the run game and watching him in the pass game, really, really impressive. We've seen plenty of him.
Tanner McLaughlin.
Yeah.
I mean, played for Jed Fish, right? Multiple kind of pro offense guy.
Yeah.
45 catches, 4 touchdowns last year.
Yep.
But did you AJ Barner, Michigan?
I haven't watched him a whole lot.
Okay.
No.
Okay. What'd you think of my guy Ben Sinnott? H-back?
Well, I agree with you. Well, sometimes the guys that move in formations a lot and maybe end up sealing off the backside when they come back in a fullback position get labeled an H-back, even though
he wears 34.
That's usually a strong indicator what number, right? And that's, you do that knowing the stereotypes that come with it, right? When you wear that number. Yeah. But to come back to Brock Bowers, I do think so. Brock Bowers was a generational player in college. Like, you look at his production. Can you pull up his stats real quick?
Yeah.
You have those in front of you. In the SEC, on a team that won 2 national titles with him, right, in 21 and 22, 63 catches in 22, 56 catches in 21. His first 2 years, right? That was his true freshman and true sophomore year. And across those 2 seasons, 21 touchdowns or 20 touchdowns. Sorry, 13 and 7.
26 in 3 years. Yeah, 13
in 3 years.
As a freshman.
And he had some injuries this year, right? That's why that production fell off a little bit. So Brock is a guy, if you just look at the numbers, right? 71, 82, 71. That is an insane amount of production as far as reception, or excuse me, I'm looking at targets. Receptions, 56 catches this year on 71 targets. All right, Brock is the guy that I mentioned earlier. Don't underestimate. This is the other factor when evaluating tight ends. Don't underestimate what a guy is capable of when you really feel like he wants the ball every play. There are good players out there that don't fit that mold, right? And that's fine, right? We got a guy that, he's 3 or 4 catch a game. But to want a guy that really is hungry and wants the ball 10 plus times a game, you got to do everything you can to keep him healthy. But it is not very common. And when you find a guy like that there's the intersection of that, and so his mindset and his ability, you have what could be one of the all-time greats at the position. Because Brock's run after the catch, which we haven't even gotten into yet today, the all-time, the run after the catch ability to make 5-yard gains, 15-yard gains is also what's game-changing about Brock Bowers.
Well, it's part of what feels hard about if you're the Niners saying, let's take a guy in the 3rd round. Right. Like the Iowa guys being and we got to wrap it up here in a second, but the Iowa guys being a good example. Guys like Bowers who have 3 years of college production playing tight end are not common. Stanford had several of them. Right. But for the most part, you're like, did Kittle even catch the ball at Iowa? Like, what the hell's going on? Like, you're projecting these guys who didn't really do it much. You look at like Brian Thomas. They're like, led the SEC in catches 2 years in a row. Gets probably a good receiver.
You see some of that at every position. Like the receiver position sometimes the receiver position, it's the other way. A guy in college has like 90 catches a year, and then he gets to the NFL. It's like, man, this guy can't get open, right?
Yeah.
So rarely for tight end does it go the other way, though. Usually, if you're starting to see a trend in the right direction, usually it starts to continue to go that way in the NFL if a guy, has a complete player. And again, I say Brock is undersized. I'm talking about the line of scrimmage, being able to move people. He's going to have to play with great technique. He can play low, which is a huge advantage. But he's not undersized to be a true playmaker in every other facet of the game. I mean, 240 running around there at 6'4" on the perimeter and not letting DBs tackle you. I mean, you should be a monster in that regard. And he's got some serious speed too. So I think linebackers will struggle to tackle him too.
Devin Culp. Somebody brought up Devin Culp. UW's actually produced tight ends, like second and third round tight ends in recent years. So
Devin Culp made some incredible catches this year. I mean, some of it was the throw was just as good as the catch. But, in an interview recently, Roma Dunze referenced how hard it was to be productive in their previous system under Jimmy Lake. And then when Kalen DeBoer got there and how he changed things up and brought Michael Penix in, everyone else blossomed. Devin Culp is a great example of that, of a guy that really blossomed with a different system and a better quarterback. And he made some incredible catches this year.
It'll be interesting to see Ryan Grubb in Seattle as the Seahawks offense. Before I let you go, any other takes I didn't get to that you want to get off your chest?
You always think I have takes, huh? Always.
I know you have takes. You have opinions on everything.
We're at the 46-minute mark. We might have to save those takes for another show.
Your take is we got to go. That's your take.
That's what it is.
It's Monday, and I got business to do. Okay.
That's right. All right. The tight end expert has to go.
Tight end next time you can come back as something else. All right, Evie. Great seeing you. Thanks for finally agreeing. I've worked on you for months to do this.
Stop.
So thanks for finally.
Happy to come on anytime.
Oh, okay. Well, you changed. That's what you changed your tune, but it's great to see you. Thanks.
Yeah, it was fun, dude. Take care.
Okay. Goodbye. I'm going to hang up on you or remove you. There he goes. There goes my buddy, Evan Moore. I hope that was insightful and enjoyable for you. I always love talking to him. And, it's draft week. So we got plenty more coming up this week. Appreciate y'all being here. And I'll talk to you soon. Later.